Oh, hey, there we go. Fantastic.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Sorry for all of that.
Hey, no worries, no
It's
worries.
been an
You're
interesting
online
few
now.
minutes here.
Hey, everybody's back now. We're back over 100 folks tuned in. So this is my good friend Tegan Martin-Drysdale, who is a real estate and community leader here in Edmonton. I'm very grateful to her for making time to join us. And you're over in one of the Nest8 units? Just over
Yes, I
there?
am. Yeah, and one of the first ones to be occupied here in this next week. So it's an exciting milestone for us to reach.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, first of all, why don't you tell us? Okay, I think my team's backed off now, so I think I can take this off. Why don't you explain to folks here how we know each other, where we met?
So we met in 2009, I believe, when I joined NextGen, which was a committee that was put together at the time by Mayor Mandel for 18 to 40-year-olds in the city that wanted to get involved in civic matters and work towards building a city that they wanted to live in and work in and grow families in. And so that initiative really kickstarted a whole bunch of conversations. And it was right at that time when all the conversations about the airport potentially being closed and what that could look like. We had the ways, which were strategic plans for the growth of the city and a number of different ways that the city was going to grow in the next 30 years. And so that was a very pivotal time to be involved with NextGen, because we were giving our voice and our input to these big strategic plans. And one of the big ones that I took a passion in because of my background and passion in sustainability was the way we green, and creating a vision for how we could move urban centers and cities like Edmonton towards a more sustainable future.
And here we are. I mean, we're not at the sustainable future yet, but we're chipping away at it in a pretty big way with Blatchford here. And so tell us a little bit about the housing that you've created and the community that you're hoping to help support building here.
Sure. So I sometimes just have to pinch myself when I realize and I stop and I look around at what we're building. This isn't just a 2-year project that we've been working on. I do feel like I've been dreaming about this moment for well over 10 years. For me, my passion is building. And as soon as I realized I wanted to build buildings, it wasn't very long before I realized that I wanted to focus on sustainable buildings. And I took lead training, and I went through engineering and thought, well, I would just focus on bigger projects. But then I realized that big projects take up a large part of your life, 5 to 7 years, and you don't get to necessarily talk with the end user and the occupants that are living there day to day or working there day to day. And I started to really develop a passion for housing and building more sustainable houses. I grew up north. There's not a lot of choices for housing in the north because you're usually living in modular type housing. It's built very efficiently, but also very cheaply. And there isn't a lot of consideration to the thickness of your walls, your insulation, your R value, the efficiency of your homes. So when, studying the build out of cities and realizing that, cities are actually a sustainable way to house a population. Density is a sustainable way to concentrate your services and your utilities and support a higher number of people. If we build too spread out, we're going to eat up more of nature and trees and our beautiful landscape. So I really wanted to focus on building in cities, but I also realized that we are not yet where we think about when we're buying a home, which is our biggest investment of our life for most of us. We don't really think about what we're actually buying and what's inside of the walls and what's in the mechanical systems, and also how is the home going to work for us long term. I got into that trap myself when I started to buy homes in my early 20s. I was just thinking about what I needed right now in that moment. And the whole idea of flexible living wasn't a concept that I was thinking about as a buyer. You know, and you get your education of what you should live in, honestly, by influenced by friends and neighbors and stuff, but also through TV and movies, and that all American dream of living in a bigger home and all that. I kind of fell into that mindset and went down that path for a bit, and realized that I was buying into a lifestyle that I didn't actually make a conscious choice to live in. And it started to trigger some questions for me around, is this really how we should live? Is this really the type of housing that that will really build resiliency for the future? And I ultimately, for my life and my family, I decided no, I wanted to live in the most sustainable housing possible that would be a good investment for me and my family, give me flexibility for if I needed extra income down the road, or if I had an elderly parent that wanted to move in. So I started to study the flex housing principles as well, and realized sustainability is not just about our values, it's also about investing in your community and staying in your community, and not, I call it disposable housing, when you buy it for just the 5 years that it works for you, but then you're now having to move and go build another home that is, you know, that suits your changing lifestyle. So there's a lot of factors that go into building sustainable housing, and I saw Blatchford as that opportunity to build some of the most groundbreaking housing in Edmonton, and I honestly feel like we've achieved that, and it's been a long time coming.
Well, not only are they stunning to look at, and there's 3 different builders here with 3 different styles to appeal to different people, but I can see yours from where I'm sitting, like the wood cladding on the outside and the material choices and the massing, really dramatic. But partly it's, to your point, it's what's inside that really sets this kind of housing apart. First of all, there are legal secondary suites downstairs, I think, so that you can either use the whole house or rent the basement or have in-laws or a sibling going to Nate or whatever, either for revenue or for space that you need as families grow and shrink demographically over time. So that flexibility was something that people really resisted when we said we're going to put secondary suites in townhomes. There was a bit of pushback at first because people said, oh, you can't do that. And then now, of course, with the city plan and the zoning bylaw, we've essentially allowed that just about anywhere in the city, effectively quadrupling the density available on a 50-foot lot through being able to subdivide it into side-by-side duplex or 2 narrow lot houses with secondary suites in them. So that gives that flexibility. But the other thing about all of the houses here, by condition of development, is that they're very, very energy efficient houses that ought to be cheaper to run over time as well. So tell us a little bit, and because it's one of the things that we're going to be talking about, and that I suspect there's going to be some maybe controversy about tomorrow at executive committee, is why to you as a builder is it important that the housing that you're building here is super energy efficient and super sustainable at this point? And how does that relate to climate issues and cost issues for the consumer in your mind?
Okay, so I actually think historically, we as Canadians and in the building industry in general, historically, we're changing that, but historically we have not actually known how to build buildings effectively on the Canadian landscape. So up until recently, we didn't really focus on the insulation and the impacts of our cold climate. We're very much influenced by warmer climates to the south, and that's where we get a lot of our technical expertise from, and over the years that's changed, and so now we're starting to think more about the energy efficiency of our homes and the utility costs. Utility costs, I believe, and I don't think that I'm alone in thinking this, those are a huge variable to our living costs that we don't control and are hugely impacted by world events. And I think, when you look at the recent events just in the last few years of some extreme weather conditions, and yes, we don't get hurricanes or anything per se here, but with climate change, we are expected to see more extreme temperatures. Having homes that are more resilient to those extreme temperatures and climate and changing temperatures is really going to help build resiliency for the individual families that live in resilient housing. So you'll be able to have more control over your utility costs because you can control your consumption better, because all of that heat or cooling is not just being blown out to the outside. And that's what the tight building envelope helps to prevent. And then also the additional insulation helps to prevent. So you know, there's that piece. But then also when you speak to the secondary suite aspect, resiliency comes from, especially when you think about the family, resiliency comes from being able to adapt to change without having to drastically change your living situation and your lifestyle. So when you think about COVID, just even the last year here, if you had a family member that was living alone or in a long-term care facility and you were concerned about their health and you wanted to bring them closer to you, having an ability to do a suite or having a suite ready where they can come and actually live with you and you can bring them in under your care. When I've talked to families, that really resonates with them right now. So it's thinking about the energy impacts to climate change, but then climate change is also impacting our lifestyles, because they do say that it inherently impacts the increase of disease and you know, issues like COVID. So there's so many things that just even a year ago I would not have attributed to why buying and building resilient housing should be a top priority. I always thought about it more from temperature changes and utility cost changes, but now I also think about in terms of family health and the health of your kids. How do you build resiliency to impacts to your family's health? And that is through being able to live multi-generationally, or just rent out that additional suite and take that extra income and put it towards the care of a loved one. So that's how I think that this is really going to help for families in the future.
Well, that plus the walkability and proximity to amenities and to employment all adds up to that overall low carbon and more affordable lifestyle over time. And it seems to me that, and I keep making this point in Ottawa, that one of the last missing pieces in really tuning the market up to deliver solutions. And by the way, you know, as you're aware, we've taken a market transformation approach to this climate work. I mean, you could change all the regs tomorrow and then have industry not ready to do it, or you incrementally move regs up. Sometimes that's called a step code change, while at the same time putting incentives out here and working with leading edge developers like yourselves at the developing and innovative end of the market to pilot new technologies. That's one of the reasons why we have one of the largest concentrations or total numbers of net zero houses in the country here in Edmonton. So there's actually quite a bit of innovative expertise that's been built up here in this community and built up at the University of Alberta, and other builders like Reza Nasri at Landmark who've been trying to figure out how to do net zero at a sort of industrial kind of scale. So people have a lot of fear about making this change, but I look at all of the expertise and technology that we have here as a cold weather climate and just think about the relevance we could have to the rest of the country and beyond in sharing that technology. But one of the things about getting the market right is getting the financing right and the price signals right, because a better house with better materials and better insulation, everything else costs more. And that goes not just for a new build here, but, you know, my house, which is a 1954 bungalow, I've done, you know, EnerGuide retrofits, we changed the insulation, changed the windows, high efficiency furnace. You know, I took it from like a 60 to an 80 something in EnerGuide. Now, it's not a net zero house, but after spending all that money, it's not worth any more than my neighbor's house across the street that's otherwise identical, hasn't had those changes. But if you had to, if the financing you could get referenced the mileage your house gets, and such that you could borrow more to pay more for a house that's had those improvements done. This is why I think things like energy labeling are critically important, so on and so forth. So I think there's still a gap on the home financing side, and that the mortgage rules really need to reward builders and buyers who are making those sustainable